Okay, folks, so I think we've got a couple more due to join, but I suggest we kick off now, if everybody's ready. So hopefully you can see the screen that I'm sharing. Just let me know in chat if anybody's got any problems with that. And thanks all for making the time to join us for the call on infrastructure monitoring. Apologies for those who it's an inconvenient hour for, and thank you very much for joining us. So to begin with, I'll just give a quick rundown of the agenda we're planning to cover, and then we can go through a quick round of introductions for everybody who's on the call. So after the introductions, we'll talk briefly about some of what we think are the key considerations for using OCDS to understand infrastructure projects. Hopefully we'll hear from John, right on cue. I see he's just joined the call, to introduce us to the Construction Sector Transparency Initiative. And then we'll hear from Natalie at Cost Ukraine and from Nkem at Badeshi from Nigeria about infrastructure monitoring. And then Tim will speak briefly on some of the plans for COST and OCDS to work together, after which we'll open it up to a general discussion. So we'll try and keep the talks and presentations brief to around 5 minutes or so for questions, and then there's plenty of time for discussion afterwards. So really our goal here is to understand more about the needs of infrastructure, the data needs for infrastructure monitoring, and how we can extend OCDS to meet those requirements. So in terms of introductions, I suggest we just go through each person on the call, and if you can just say your name, what organisation you're from, and what it is that interests you about using OCDS for infrastructure, so why you've joined the call. So I'll start. My name's Duncan Dewhurst, and I work on the OCDS help desk, so providing support to all of the different implementers and publishers around the world, and working on extending OCDS for particular sectors and use cases. So as I said, I'm here to learn more about the infrastructure specific needs for the data standards. So Daniel, I think you're next in the list, so if you could just give a brief introduction, that'd be great.
Sure. My name is Daniel Dietrich. I'm a program manager on a rather new open contracting data program at HIVOS, the Human Institute for Cooperation with Developing Countries. And I'm here because in, I guess, 1 or 2 of the 7 countries we're going to implement, we will have a focus, a sectorial focus on constructions. Keen to learn more.
Fantastic. Thanks, Daniel. It looks like, is that Gavin that's just joined?
Yeah, hi there, everyone. Sorry, I'm here in Panama, the International Anti-Corruption Conference, and the Wi-Fi doesn't work in the main thing, so I've had to retreat to a hotel lobby. Apologies for being slightly late. Excited to have everyone on the call and looking forward to seeing how we can all work together. And just one more thing I'd add, that it's very clear that the infrastructure is going to be a huge focus of the German G20 presidency. So this is not really kind of politically, like, appropriate time to be exploring what we can all achieve through open contracting.
Great, thanks, Gavin. I think, Ivan, we're just waiting for you to connect to audio, so I'll just skip to John. Can you hear us okay, John? We're not able to hear you, it seems, so we'll just carry on down the list whilst you try to resolve that. Jorge, would you be able to give a quick intro to yourself?
Hi, my name is Jorge Flores, and I work with Global Integrity, and we're exploring with some local partners about how to use the open contracting data standard to structure some data and then support efforts for social accountability. So I'm interested in learning more about this.
Fantastic, thank you. Catherine, you're up next.
Hi, I'm Catherine with Open Contracting Partnership, and I joined the call to learn some basic information about what the extensions and the timeline looks like so I can relay that to our implementers around the world.
Thanks, Catherine. Mireille?
So I'm Mireille, and Mireille Rad. I'm working with the open contracting team at the World Bank, and as a team, we're interested in seeing how to use cost and how to help with the project and how to eventually use those things in bank projects.
Awesome. Thanks, Mireille. Natalie, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Hello, my name is Natalie Forsyuk. I'm a cost country manager for Ukraine Construction Sector Transparency Initiative. We are working currently on construction projects in the road sector, where we collect data from different pilot projects in construction. We analyze a lot of contracts, and I would like to learn more from my colleagues and share the experience that we have about disclosing and using the data in construction sector.
Okay, thanks, Natalie. Nkemi, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I'm Nkemi Lo, and I work for the Public and Private Development Center as a procurement program coordinator. PPDC developed this tool called Budeshi, where we link the budget data, the procurement data, and use that to track projects on the ground. Currently, we're working on primary healthcare centers and tracking the infrastructure on the ground to see if it meets its specification, and that's why I'm here.
Great, thanks, Nkem. Patrick, I think you've joined since we started. If you could just give a brief intro, that'd be great.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, yeah.
Yeah, right. So Patrick, hello. I work with, I'm part of the team with PPDC. It set up this platform called Budeshi that Candace referred to, lead technologist, and lots of the work we've done so far has involved construction and infrastructure, such as primary healthcare centers across the country. So I'd like to see how this discussion really helps to shape our engagement in this regard.
Great, thanks, Patrick. Tim, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Tim Davies, worked on the development of the current open contracting data standard, but I'm really interested in, yes, how does that look different from a user perspective when we're looking at big infrastructure projects that may last many, many years? How do we kind of get data that gives citizens an accessible understanding of these complex projects? So really keen to see how our learning together feeds into that.
Thanks, Tim. And Johanna, I think you're our last attendee, so a quick intro would be great. I think you're muted at the moment. Okay, let's move on. And there's a couple of people with audio issues. If you can manage to get online, then introductions when you do would be great. So I have to say, it's great to see so many attendees for the call. So thanks, everybody, and thanks for doing introductions. As promised, the first bit of the agenda is just a quick look at what we think considerations for using OCDS to understand infrastructure projects. And really one of the goals of this call and the work that we're embarking on around infrastructure is to get a better understanding of which areas we should be considering in terms of how OCDS can be best adopted to meet the needs of disclosure for infrastructure projects and for monitoring of infrastructure projects. So for those that are familiar with OCDS, I'm sure you've seen this graphic before. So OCDS is all about describing contracting processes. These are the stages of the contracting process in OCDS. So we've got 5 stages from planning through tender, award, contract, and through to implementation. We expect that to be similar for an infrastructure contracting process, but we expect to see extended planning and implementation stages compared to a procurement contracting process. But this is an individual contracting process, And what we know is that infrastructure projects are made up of many contracts and many contracting processes and contracts and subcontracts, etc. And those can be spread out over a potentially long period of time. So in this example, we've got the contract for the design of an infrastructure project, a contract for the construction of the project, and a contract for supervision of the project. So one of the key questions in our minds is how we can use OCDS to link those multiple contracting processes which make up a single infrastructure project. There's a couple of ways that we can do that. In the current version of the standard, version 1, we can link contracting processes to a project. So in OCDS, there is a project field in the planning stage which can be used to link that contracting process to a project. And that field is really intended to link the contracting process in OCDS with other publicly available information on the project. What OCDS doesn't provide in its current version is an overarching project to report against. The second way that we can link contracting processes in OCDS is something that we're looking at introducing through the version 1.1 upgrade, and that is to link related contracting processes. So rather than linking multiple processes to a single project, this is about linking related contracting processes to each other. And one of the proposals for the upgrade is to introduce a related process field to both the tender and contract sections of OCDS. So that could be used, for example, to link a parent contract to subcontracts and subcontracting processes. So those are some of the key areas that have come up in our very initial bits of research around how OCDS can be used for disclosure for infrastructure projects. I'd be happy to take any brief questions or thoughts at this stage, and then we'll return to this topic in the discussion section to understand in a bit more depth what challenges there are for using OCDS for infrastructure projects. So if anybody has any questions based on those slides, please do say.
I have a quick question on the 3 phases of using OCDS to understand infrastructure projects. I know there's like design, construction, and there's a last part which is supervision. But does the supervision include like maintaining the infrastructure? Because sometimes it might include like construction, of repairing and other continuous construction processes. So can the supervision and construction, do they have any links, or is it just meant to be just supervision, without any further construction going on?
So I think this is the slide you were talking about, wasn't it, Mireille? So this is really just an example of some of the different types of contracting process that could relate to an infrastructure project. We're not really at the stage yet to say this is the guidance for exactly how you should use OCDS, and these are all of the different contracting processes that form an infrastructure project. This is really just an example of multiple contracting processes being related to a project. So I think hopefully we'll be able to answer that question in time. And Natalie, I know we talked around this previously of the different phases, so I don't know if you have a view on what the supervision phase relates to and whether there's more construction going on during that phase. I think that was the question.
Well, you know that cost standards, they also combine design, construction, and supervision stage, and we have used some OSD standards to build the information there. The problem is that to connect it to the project is quite difficult, so because the data are inputted manually. So let's say if in the future this data can have a code connected to a project and there is no necessity to put them manual, this will be much easier and more trustful. because if you have a lot of contracts to check how trustful is the information is quite complicated. At the moment, we use supervision section not for the maintenance, but only for the construction. So when the construction is finished and supervising engineer is confirming that and the payment is done and everything is clear, then this is the final stage of the contract. Further maintenance is usually a separate contract which is already which can be awarded to a different contractor and may or may not be connected to the contractor who was involved in the construction. So I think in the future we see maintenance as a separate contract in a special section, maintenance, because it has a little bit different approach. It has no design, but it has maintenance. You know.
Yeah, I guess maybe if I can come in here, I think, Mireille, you raise a really interesting question about infrastructure. So cost, as I understand, is very much focusing on that envelope that runs from the design to the construction being complete. But we know, say, with a road, that road has a many-year lifespan, and we might want to know, was there a 3-year gap and then maintenance done? Was maintenance done regularly? So I think that challenges us to think really creatively about how those other subsequent contracts that might be from all sorts of different places might be linked back to that project. And my hunch is that that's more likely to be from things like geodata, knowing that a subsequent road contract has been signed in exactly this place, rather than through getting people to link those later maintenance contracts back to some abstract notion of a project that's probably been forgotten that project ever was a discrete thing a number of years on.
Well, there is also a thing if we, for example, have in road construction, if we have OPRC projects, which are performance-based projects, then construction can be connected to maintenance, and then constructor has to maintain the road. Yep. But sometimes when you finish construction, that's the end of the project, and maintenance is the object for another tender procedure, and it's completely separate contract.
Great. So that's a really helpful distinction, and as Tim says, something useful to think about there of how the design and build phase can be linked to the future maintenance phase. Next up, as Natalie briefly mentioned, cost there. We were hoping that, John, you would be able to give a quick intro to cost, but I'm not sure your audio is working. So perhaps if you could just try talking to us and see if we can hear you. No, it doesn't seem like we can. Tim, I might rely on you here. Are you familiar enough with the cost data standard to give a quick intro?
If you pop up the next slide, then either I or I think Gavin, as I think a cost board member, might be able to come in as well. But construction, and obviously Natalie is also our resident expert. But one of the things we did earlier this year was to look at the cost infrastructure data standard, which describes the kinds of things that should be disclosed as part of transparency of a construction project, and look at mapping that to OCDS, which we'll come to later on. But as you can see, the cost data standard really divides into two areas: project data and contract data. And that raises this issue that we've just addressed above, that OCDS is about contracts. Cost is thinking about projects and their associated contracts. So there's lots of things here that are kind of encouraged or required for disclosure under cost, from things around the early planning of the project, its location, its purpose, the project preparation, a lot of the impact studies, environmental impact studies, other preparatory studies that are done, and information on completion. And I think John's managed to connect, so I'll hand over to John at that point. We've got the data standard on screen.
Okay, sorry about this. I have no idea why my microphone stopped working when I was using it not that long ago. Right. Actually, the previous slide was quite interesting. I was just going to say something about that. What you'll find increasingly is the distinction between design and construction is being blurred, particularly in developed markets. So the UK, the big agencies you'll be using the OCDS on are all high-risk agency, places like that, all doing design and construct. So that means there's a kind of a rough scope. There's a scope of work, but then the contractor's there to bring in the design team and work closely with the design team before they get into construction. I think increasingly that model is being exported around the world. So rather than having a kind of linear process around design and construct, supervision kind of underlining that, you increasingly get a more, interactive approach, more integrated approach to the contract. So I suspect, and then obviously once we're looking at, there's all sorts of different models now for with turnkey contracts and things like that. Hang on, sorry, there's someone at my door. Sorry about this.
No problem. Thanks, John. Just let John answer the door quickly. Okay, so that's really interesting as well, and I think something we can explore as we move into discussion is to what extent are we just talking about 2 or 3 large contracts that make up the project, and how often are we seeing that there's actually many contracts and subcontracts which also need to be reported on?
Yeah, what we're trying to do at the moment is just look at what we kind of the Tier 1 contracts, so principally around the design, contract, construction, and supervision. We haven't gone into subcontracts, but we know that that is often where a lot of the murky stuff is as well. So I think in due course we can start looking at that as well. It'd be quite interesting to get into that level of detail once we kind of try this out at a high level. And then moving on, if you go on to the next slide, as we said, I thought, so just very briefly before I talk about the data standard, for those who don't know, I think most looking at the list, most of you do know, COST is really the Infrastructure Transparency Initiative. We're working in 15 or 16 countries. I'm losing track. I think we're announcing a Panama program tonight and Costa Rica program next week. And we are supported, we kind of have programs, a lot in Central America, a lot in Africa, and a few in Ukraine and Asia. And we're really about disclosing really the disclosure of the data, as you see in the IDS, but also about the validation of that data and the interpretation of that data through an insurance process. So we don't just stop at really trying to institutionalize this approach to getting data into the public domain. We actually try to look at it and make some sense of it through this assurance process. And then because we kind of, our origins are kind of, when DFID initiated COST was really EITI, so we have this multi-stakeholder groups that kind of approach that oversees this and gives strategic direction to national programs. Then the data standard. Now, when we developed the data standard a number of years ago, it was really, we weren't aware of open data at all. It was it was only, open data really was only its infancy. But we kind of learned from a pilot that we did 7 or 8 years ago now that we wanted to minimize the number of documents that were disclosed, because particularly sitting here in Tanzania at the moment, getting hold of documents is a terrible business. It's a really slow, laborious business. So we wanted to try and get to the point where we had numerical data, standardized text, and then some summary information that put the data into some kind of context. And it very much was a project approach, as you see, as Tim's described. Because of the complexities of infrastructure, we felt that you needed a complete picture because there are issues around land, environment, project budgets are made up of all sorts of things, land purchases, legal costs. So just having the contract price is insufficient. And then how we then structure it is we have the contract data as well, but again, a lot of it's numerical and standardized text. So generally what we try to encourage is that it is those kind of core design, construction and supervision contracts are disclosed. And then if there are any other interesting major contracts out there, sometimes you get kind of, say, particularly in the high-income countries, you get consultants are there to support the kind of the process of estimating costs, management of costs on the project, because they can evolve quite a lot during the course of the project. But what we try then to encourage is a kind of a legal mandate to get this. You'll start disclosing at scale, and then work with governments to build their capacity to disclose that with e-procurement portals. You've heard of CSOCs in Honduras. We have Guatacompras in Guatemala. And really through the program and the links we make, we're hoping that things like CSOCs can go to other countries. There's a dialogue at the moment between Malawi government and Honduras government about CSOCs platform being shared in Malawi. But as I think I've mentioned to some of you before, this is developed by infrastructure specialists and not data specialists. So we really, our knowledge about how you could turn this into a data standard is limited, to say the least, and the kind of the coding and things like that, and how you get the geospatial references and all those, and the unique reference numbers, that's not something we're familiar with, and this is why we're very keen that we do align ourselves with OCDS, because, I mean, most of the items in both standards are covered, and get that knowledge from you guys to really make sure this, between the two standards, they can come together to be aligned, and there's a kind of a tool for infrastructure projects as well as contracts that lends itself to publishing data in an open source format.
Great.
So
thanks, John.
I'll stop there.
Oops. We're obviously closely aligned in our thoughts there.
Yeah.
That's really useful, and I think that the two things you've highlighted there around the use of the e-procurement systems to disclose the information on the contracts, and also this kind of crossover of the domain-specific knowledge about infrastructure from costs with the data-specific knowledge from the Open Contracting Data Standard is kind of where the alignment and where the crossover comes together. So a little bit later on, Tim's got a couple of slides where he's going to talk in a little bit more detail about how we see the two fitting together based on the work we've done so far. But that was a really helpful intro to cost and to the cost data standard. I suggest we move straight on to Natalie, if you're still with us,
Yes.
who can give us an example of an implementation, if you like, of the cost standard in Ukraine. I'll just bring your slides up, Natalie.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Okay, so I don't want to stop on this slide very much, because we had a fantastic speech from John explaining the 40 data points from infrastructure data standards on different stages. So we can just move on. What we do here and the data that we use are not only disclosed data, I mean the data in this presentation. This is something already turned to information during the assurance process that is going after the disclosure. So we hire some independent consultants who look at the disclosed data and turn them into information in a simple language. And now we'll have some few examples of how we do that and what questions it can lead to. First of all, we were analyzing budgets for different areas of Ukraine. Generally, we have 24 regions, which we call oblasts, and analyzing general financing for the road repairs from local budgets we have found out that almost half of it, 47%, went to only 5 oblasts from 24. So the rest 19 oblasts received the other half, and the criteria of spreading this budget are not clear and not transparent. So this process is completely in the shadow, and civil society doesn't trust it. And when the question, when questions are coming, why exactly these areas, these regions are receiving more money, there are no clear answers or clear criteria which can be used to answer, because we simply cannot find them in any open sources or even not open sources during the assurance process. So can we move to the next slide? Also, we have analyzed 120 tenders, and you can see that 38% of these 120 tenders have only 2 bidders. And usually these 2 bidders, they actually share the market, winning by turns or in some percentage in each region. And when the 3rd bidder is coming in some special oblasts, which you can find here, Volhynia Oblast, different names, Ukrainian names, which you are not interested very much in, but you can see how 2 companies actually share the market. And when 3rd company is coming, it's simply disqualified because of different reasons. So 2 bidders and 2 winners, you can see it's 38%. Can we move? Yeah. So generally, we have analyzed, like I said, 120 contracts in 17 oblasts. And we have found out that we have 43 contractor companies. But despite the fact that there are 43 contracting companies, there are top 5 of contractor companies who received 51% of contracts in value. And also, despite the fact that some of oblasts have a kind of competition where you have 5, 6, sometimes 7 bidders per contract, 100% of contracts goes to 1 contractor, 1 winner. You can see three regions here that had very good competition, but only 1 contractor is winning because of some reasons which we cannot explain. Also here you have a slide showing the difference in the same kind of repair, which we called intermediate current repair or running repair. You can see that costs of 1 kilometer of road repair varies very much from 2 million hryvnia, it's Ukrainian currency, to almost 8 million hryvnia. And it doesn't mean that where the value is higher, that there are more corruption or mismanagement risks. They actually use different solutions for the current and intermediate repair. But what we found out, asking questions, why do they do that, and what it can cause in the end, we could see that some solutions of this current intermediate repair were very close to actually capital repair. Because of lack of financing, they were trying to solve the problem with doing extremely expensive running repair instead of capital repair. But in this case, contractors are still giving guarantees on their job, actually on their construction, 3-5 years, like on current repair, but not close to capital repair, which has to be from 10 to 15 years. So this solution sometimes is still okay solution to make better roads, but it causes other problems and other gray area with a guarantee for the job which they do. Can we move on? So what we are working on now, we are trying to use disclosed data just to identify some corruption and mismanagement risks in road construction in Ukraine, course, it's very difficult to follow because of time, because of these 3 stages: design, contract, and supervision. It's very difficult, and we would like to work together with Prosoro, which is the electronic tender system, to identify some risks. And here you can see some of them, which we find most commonly just from a first glance. We will, of course, continue this work because road services are starting to use electronic system, this Prosoro system, from 1st of August, and we have the data before they started using this electronic system. So what we are going to do next is we are going to actually compare what have changed in the procurement of road construction after the electronic tenders were started to be used. And this will give us an opportunity, a unique opportunity to generate, together with Transparency International, to generate some ideas and tools on how to improve the system when you buy such complex, product like construction. So this is basically it. If anybody has some questions, please, you're welcome.
Thanks, Natalie. I think it's fascinating to see the results already from that you're able to get from analysis of the data on these infrastructure projects. I'd be interested to know, you mentioned earlier about there being lots of manual input involved in collecting the data, so I'd be interested to know what are the challenges you've found with working with the kind of non-standardized data.
Well, actually, there are a lot of challenges, and we have a lot to do. First of all, you're at the stage where we are now. It's very good that we have assurance process, because we have to revise how valid and how trustful are the data. Because when you compare open data from different resources, they vary. And that's why assurance is very helpful for us. But our goal is that we would like to minimize these risks by integrating our system with other systems like Prosoro, where we can, for example, take all the information about tenders just from the electronic tender system into our system, and then later on integrate it with the payment system, because we have a system in Ukraine which follows payments from every budget procuring entity which is using public money. So these two can be connected, and then we already it will not be necessary to double check if all contracts are there, if the information is true about the amount of bidders, and everything will be in the system automatically. This will help us very much. The other thing that we actually suffer a lot from is when procuring entities have to fill the data. It's very difficult to analyze some of them because we do not have possibility to use, this dropping list, falling out list, where you can choose one of the choices, to answer. And when they print actually the answer, then it's not possible to analyze it. Then you need assurance team again to analyze the data. So we would like to make some kinds of standards for almost all, or at least as much as possible, standard answers, which will give us possibility to analyze the data more efficiently.
Fantastic. Thanks, Natalie. That's really useful insights.
I just wanted to say, Natalie, thank you so much. That was absolutely fascinating, and I guess it shows the real value of a collaboration between this kind of open contracting to accelerate some information, but then into the hands of the kind of cost assurance process, which can really kind of scrutinize and use the data. So kind of excited by the possibilities of how we can do this, across the world, learning from our wonderful Ukrainian partners. And thanks again.
Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. So we'll move on with just one more presentation or talk from Income from Badeshi, and then we'll move on to just a brief couple of slides from Tim, and then we'll open it up to general discussion. So Income, if you're still with us, we'd love to hear about your experiences of infrastructure monitoring in Nigeria, and I understand you've been using the Badeshi platform, which is built around OCDS, so it'd be fascinating to hear what the benefits and challenges of that have been.
Okay, thank you very much for having me. The Badeshi platform, like you said, it was built on the OCDS, and the main purpose for us was to link procurement and budget data that we usually get and link the two together to contract implementation data and be able to track the information on the ground. So sometime last year we requested information from around, actually we are focused around primary healthcare and healthcare delivery and the education sector. So sometime last year we requested for this bunch of information from the Primary Health Center, who is the regulatory agency for primary healthcare in Nigeria. And one of the first challenges we had was the way the data was presented. There is no standard, there is no particular format, so you could request today and get information in totally different headings and get information tomorrow in a totally different heading. And the work was up to us to match the data on the procurement to data from the budget office. And in matching that, we had to use the Badeshi platform to assign unique identifiers tracking each of the projects. So when we were able to do that, we had a clearer picture. We were able to see how the contracts were awarded. We were able to see the sums for which the contracts were awarded. And one of the first things that jumped out for us was the fact that majority of the contracts, the particular locations, in several locations actually, were awarded for exactly the same sum down to the decimal point. And these are contracts for projects or infrastructure that have totally different specifications. So, for example, one of the type of primary health care you have is a type 1 primary health care, which is the most basic. A one-room structure that's supposed to just cater to basic needs. The contract award sum for that was exactly the same for a type 2, which is a much larger structure, which is a much more complicated service delivery program or expectation. And that raised some sort of red flag for us. And these are different locations. So you have one in the south and you have one in the north. And these are areas with different geography and stuff like that. So that raised the red flag for us. So we had to mobilize monitors on the ground, people to go and actually see if these projects, following the specifications that the primary health care also provided, are actually what you have on the ground. And that came back with also another round of interesting results. So you have the government expending a lot of money building primary health care centers. But majority of what we saw on ground were that these primary health care centers were not functional. So either you have buildings that have not lived up to their specifications. For example, you could find a building without a primary health care center without any source of water. And you're wondering what kind of health risk it poses to the people using it. Or you find a primary health care center that has been locked up since 2014. It's been completed, but it's been locked up since 2014. This is 2016, on the grounds that the contractor had not been paid or the funds had not been disbursed. Another interesting case was the case where we found that funds had been disbursed since 2014. So all intents and purposes, the contract had been executed. But when we got to the ground, there was no structure on site. There was nothing. It was just a bare ground. And those are the things we are collating currently in a report, and that we're also providing feedback to the primary health care centers. And the only way we could see this was because Badeshi presented it in a clear picture, providing the budget estimates, connecting it with the actual contract sums, the contractors who were in charge of these projects, and also the delivery time for those projects. And those was clear, those details were clearly displayed. But our main challenge is the fact that, first of all, Nigeria doesn't have an e-procurement system, so everything is still done manually. Everything is still in hard copy, PDF format, no open format. And it takes a while to get this kind of information. And when you eventually get this information, matching the different data sets you get from different government agencies, verifying that this information is actually accurate. It's assumed that when you get from the government agencies, this information is accurate. But then again, they tell you there are contracts within contracts. So, for example, you see a contract for 21 million, saying the building of the primary healthcare center, and you go there, and the next response you get that, oh, this contract is just for the structure. It has nothing to do with provision of water supply. It has nothing to do with staffing. It has nothing to do with operational matters of the primary healthcare centers. Then again, you have to go back. So it's Nigeria's OCDS and future would be better. I think it's better enhanced as soon as we can get an e-procurement system that's running. That way we can link the procurement data to the contract data, and all will be aligned using data that is already on the website. And that's what we're currently working on. I think the Nigerian government is currently talking about building an e-procurement system that is using the OCDS that includes the OCDS specification. And hopefully, when we can get that done, I think that would also help to present data in a more useful format for a lot of users in Nigeria. That wasn't so fast.
No, that was fascinating. Thanks, Nkem. And I think really interesting to hear about those areas where there's clear kind of common areas with the work that Natalie's been doing in Ukraine in terms of red flags that you're highlighting there, but also around the challenges of manually inputting data where it's not accessible in electronic systems, and that gives us something really good to think about in terms of as we work towards an extension to OCDS for infrastructure, focusing on making sure there's good templates for manual input of data.
Yeah.
And also great to hear that OCDS and Badeshi was really helpful in terms of linking the different stages of the contracting process to enable you to do that analysis.
Yeah, the OCDS platform has certainly helped in helping us present a clearer picture, and people are able to view the data more and track it across the whole chain. Because previously it was very difficult. You have a budget title saying something else, and you have the data coming from the procuring entity saying something else. But with the unique identifiers, you're able to match them, go back for clarification, and impute that kind of data.
Fantastic, thank you. Is there any other questions at this stage? We're going to move on to kind of open discussion shortly. A couple more slides from Tim, but if there's any questions off the back of Nkem's talk, now's the time. Okay, great. In that case, Tim, I'll hand over to you and just move on to the slides that looking in a bit more detail at how costs and OCDS can work together.
Yeah, so I'll try and be very, very brief on these. If you can just take us to the next slide, Duncan. Essentially, what we've always said with the Open Contracting Data Standard is it's doing two things. It's saying what to disclose and how to disclose it. But when we combine that with cost, we've got to go back to look at what does cost ask for. As John mentioned earlier, there's been a real process of prioritizing what's the important data that cost has said needs to be out there for transparency, and we've got to see how would that be represented in OCDS, how could we validate that it's been presented, and how could we then communicate it back to different kinds of users, so whether that's the kind of analytical use that both Natalie and Nkem have described, or whether that's the citizen user who's trying to understand a major investment. So that's really the challenge we're dealing with. If you go to the next slide, Duncan. Earlier on, you saw that kind of cost data standard. On the contracting side of it, it's very straightforward. OCDS captures most of those things. On the project side, we're really thinking about how might we capture those in an extended version of the data standard. But we know that extending the standard is not just about saying here's a few extra places in a schema to put these bits of information. We also need to develop really good accessible guidance and documentation to help people do that, and that help tools and services emerge that are going to support the kinds of analysis that are needed. So it's striking that balance between descriptions or location information or sector information being very easy to transcribe from a document where it's messy text into a field, or making it very structured so that analysis can be done based on it as data. But it might be kind of trickier to map. So that's kind of some of the challenges we've got ahead and where our roadmap takes us into 2017. We're still developing the kind of plan of action together with OCP, Cost and others. But just to give a sense of the idea that we think OCDS can be used as a starting point here. There's still some work to do before it captures everything that's covered by cost, and some of these conceptual issues around what is a construction project, an infrastructure project, how do we tie together all these different contracts, and then can mention the fact that what looks at first glance like one contract may have all sorts of other contracts behind it. So I think there's a need to work together on the tools that can assemble all that information better as well. But I won't say too much more now because I'm aware we've got limited time left for discussion, so I'm more keen to hear all the insights from others on the call.
Great, thanks Tim. And so I'd like to open the floor now to discussion, and just to say thank you very much to everybody who presented there, some really, really fascinating stuff. So hopefully we've got lots of good questions. So I'll hand over if anybody would like to ask a question or raise a topic for discussion.
Well, I have a question. Like I have more like two things for discussion. The first thing is for the project data. Have you considered has it been in discussion to release more like technical documentation for the projects? Like it may not be like the actual like AutoCAD file or something, but more like a design map of the buildings, or like the type of materials being used, and more like technical specification. One is that it helps kind of build knowledge. So when you think about the data use for the community who works in infrastructure and construction, I think it would be kind of interesting to have access to kind of more technical documentation about the projects. So from looking at the project fields, I was wondering if this is something that might be up for kind of to be there, or if there's a lot of pushback on such things because they have intellectual property. So I just want to hear if there's any thoughts on that. And the second question is, do you think for construction data, for infrastructure projects, I know that geolocation is usually the main element in geographical data, but I think now a lot of the mapping platforms are providing also like 3D extrusion models, and like you see it on Google Maps, you see it on Mapbox a lot now. So which Mapbox uses already an open source OpenStreetMap as like its engine. So I'm wondering, are we only interested in geolocation data, or could there be interest in other type of geolocations?
Thanks, Mireille. And I might, John, if you're still with us, hand that one over to you, as I guess that's kind of the first question around whether the technical specifications and kind of CAD drawings of the infrastructure are something that's included in the cost data standard.
What we've got is, which is not on the slides, is we have a list of information we ask to be made available on a reactive basis, so available upon request. And we tend to ask those documents to be in that list as well. Now, what Honduras has done is gone one step further and actually are now proactively disclosing those documents as well. Kind of just actually they're linked documents and they can be downloaded as PDF. I mean, the relevant parts of I think that somehow within the IDS is somehow kind of structured in such a way that it's fairly easy to just download those kind of additional documents. Where the discussions, I've had various discussions over the years around confidentiality. And it's not necessarily where you think it is. It's not necessarily around bid prices and cost, information around costs. It's often around intellectual property in the tender proposals, the methodology statements. Those kinds, they get a little. The contractors get a little uneasy if they think some of those concepts might get made public, because that's where they, particularly in the more developed, the high-income market, that's where they get their competitive edge. Because everyone, all the big firms have the same internal databases. They all have, they know the cost of materials, the cost of labor. That's not going to be that dissimilar. Where the issue is where they get their competitive edges on those kind of intellectual IP issues, and that is where they do get some issues. And I'm just remembering that under the UK Freedom of Information legislation, we were told that tenure evaluation was the only thing that we couldn't request under FOI of the data kind of documents we were looking for. Everything else can be made public. And then on geospatial, we're open to all sorts of ideas around this, because with roads, I mean, it's not just, the location can be very long. So we're open to all sorts of any ideas we can around that, definitely.
Thanks, John. And I guess from the data standard point of view, what we're always trying to do is strike a balance between what should be in the core of a standard that all publishers and procuring entities can be expected to disclose, and what might only apply in certain jurisdictions or to countries with a certain capacity. So I think the point on the 3D extrusion data and things extending on that geospatial information could be something that we look to include as an extension, but perhaps wouldn't form part of the core of the OCDS for infrastructure.
Yeah, although I think there's something really interesting that we can pick up on in open contracting's position as something that's both about transparency but also around a whole range of other use cases. So something that strikes me from Mireille's comment is we should think about who are those other users of this data, and recognizing that potential contractors are users of this data. Industry press, road specialist press or port specialist press might be users of some of this data. So it would be really interesting to think about what are the data fields and requirements that might not be required by a cost implementation, but could be kind of recommended and encouraged because they serve some of those other user communities. And what we know is when we make sure the standard serves more than one use case, we're more likely to be able to convince people to proactively publish and able to get kind of both the government parties and contracting parties on board, which is particularly important, I think, with major infrastructure where the publication of, say, subcontracting data and downstream data is often going to rely on collaboration from the lead contractor. So in helping them see open contracting as something that's a tool for them, at least for the progressive ones, and not just a stick kind of thing, could be really important and worth thinking about those different things they might want.
Sorry, I agree with that completely, Tim. Just before I have to go, about the use of data, I think academics are going to be, particularly construction management academics, are really going to want this data. Over the years, there's been a lot of discussion about the kind of issues that Natalie raised about low price leading actually to higher costs. And it's really led to kind of a lot of discussion, debate about what is the right approach to procurement for both the construction, particularly construction contracts. And for years we were lobbying the bank and saying lowest price contracts don't lead to better value. But actually, there was the issue that was challenged us around was on data. So what we think you can do with the data is you can say, well, which procurement methods are actually leading to kind of more realistic prices that minimize the risk of kind of, and actually then you see better kind of outturn costs at the end of the contract. So you start getting that data, and the construction management guys are going to fall over themselves for that kind of stuff. I mean, you know, Loughborough University, places like that, they'll log that stuff. So I need to go to the airport, so it's been great to take part, and we'll speak soon.
Thanks, John. That's great. Thank you very much.
Great. Cheers. Bye.
And I think the point that John touched on there again about linking the type of procurement method that's been used to ultimately what is the contract cost is another great example of where the linking of the different stages of the contracts and process is really valuable to enable that analysis. Any other questions or topics for discussion? Okay, great. So we are running fairly close to time. So,
sorry, I could just unmute myself. Is there anything in terms of what you need to know or things you want to think about that you and Tim are really still challenged by, that you want to throw out to the group now, or that we need to reach out to other people in the kind of infrastructure? What do you think of all the kind of cost contacts with business professional and with contractors associations? So things you need to kind of complete the data model, and you're thinking about this, where we need to interrogate other people to find out the answers.
So I'd certainly say there's a lot to do to take our thinking forward. We're very much at the earlier stages. So I would hope over early part of next year we're really going to have some deeper conversations with people who've been on this call. I think, yeah, lots of outreach to be done. I think finding people who can help us with piloting kind of extensions to the standard to meet with cost and compliance. And particularly be interesting to think about, yeah, how might multi-stakeholder groups in cost context be engaged as part of these processes would be great.
Great, thanks Tim and Gavin. So yeah, we're running fairly close to time for the call. Certainly happy to keep the call open for anybody who'd like to stay around and discuss. But perhaps if we just have a few closing comments now, and those who need to leave can. So I guess to wrap up, that's certainly been very helpful. And as Tim says, we're at the very early stages of embarking on this journey of developing an extension to OCDS to capture information on infrastructure projects. In terms of where we eventually want to get to with that, as Tim alluded to, and as the slide on the screen says, the ultimate product won't just be a technical extension to the schema, but we're aiming to also develop all of the supporting documentation and guidance to go with that, covering these topics like how to use OCDS to report on a project and not just an individual contracting process, and also what supporting tools and processes need to be in place. So that could be things like having good templates, so manual input of data where that needs to happen, and how you can take data in from systems such as Prosoro or e-government procurement systems, which are increasingly outputting OCDS data. Tim, anything to add on where we're eventually headed with this?
Nothing at this point.
Great. So in terms of immediate next steps, we'll share the presentations, notes and recording from the call over the next few days. And in the new year, we'll be, as Tim said, reaching out to you guys who've joined us for the call today to explore these issues in a bit more depth, and starting to put together a scoping note for what the development of this extension will look like. And we'll share that with the community to get your feedback on it. So I guess with that as the closing comments, please do feel free to head off or stick around as you see fit. But yeah, just to open the floor again, if there's any questions or topics for discussion.
That's been great. Thanks so much, Duncan. And thanks everyone for contributing.
Thank you all. I had a non-cost question about OCDS. Recently I was asked when the newest version of OCDS will be released. Do we have a timeline on that?
We're aiming for February, but yes, we hope it will be Feb.
Thank you.
So, Catherine, I know you were interested to join on red flags. Was there anything you wanted to dive into a bit further on the red flags that Natalie and Kem had mentioned in their presentations while we're still on the line?
I didn't have any comments or questions on the regard. I may reach out via email over the next couple of days if anything comes to mind.
Great, thanks.
Sorry, I wanted to ask, and I just put this in the chat. The place of PP and public-private partnerships in the OCDS scheme, is there something around that you're looking at? Because a lot more of the infrastructure contracts in Nigeria, especially given the size and the cost, are PPP. So what's the place in, and the disclosure mechanisms are a bit more difficult and more complex, given the duration and the parties involved. What's the place for in OCDS?
Great question, and Kem, it's almost like we planted the question. So we have been working on a PPP extension to OCDS, so we can capture information on as much more complex and long-term contracts that are involved in PPPs. So at present, if you want to have a look on the Open Contracting Data Standard GitHub, we have a repository there where we're developing the PPP extension, and we're aiming to have a first draft of that over the next few weeks, and to be working on some validation with PPP publishers in the early part of January. So it would be early next year that we'd be in a position to have a kind of a fully published version of that, but it's absolutely something that we're looking at. In a sense, the work we've been doing on the PPP extension lays the groundwork for some of this infrastructure work, because some of the commonalities in terms of longer planning and implementation stages and more information on the monitoring of implementation are very common between infrastructure projects and PPPs. And it also lays the groundwork in terms of it's the first major kind of sectoral extension we've worked on for OCDS. So it'll be a bit of a blueprint for how we go about the infrastructure extension as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right. I think we'll close the call there, but hopefully be talking to many more of you soon. Thanks again.